Think about the last conversation you had that felt off. Not because of anything the person said, exactly, the words were fine, maybe even reassuring. But something underneath didn't match. Some quality in how they held themselves, or a flicker across their face before they smiled, or the way their voice stayed flat when the words said everything was great. You noticed something. You just didn't know what to do with it. That noticing, that quiet sense that a conversation is carrying more than its surface, is not a quirk of particularly perceptive people. It is a basic human capability, one that most of us access in fragments without ever learning to read it systematically. And the gap between fragmentary intuition and genuine, reliable understanding of people is one of the most consequential gaps in most people's lives. Consider what it would mean to close it. To walk into a room and read, within minutes, who's comfortable and who's performing, who's genuinely on board and who's waiting to disagree, who needs space and who needs to feel heard. To have a conversation and understand not just what someone is telling you but what they're feeling while they tell it, including the things they haven't found words for yet, or haven't decided to share. To notice when someone's words and body are telling different stories, and to respond to the real one. This is not mysticism. It is a learnable skill, grounded in observation, pattern recognition, and genuine attentiveness to other people. And it begins with a single foundational shift, starting to pay attention to what's actually in front of you, rather than simply processing the verbal content of what people say. Let's begin with why this matters more than most people realize. Studies on human communication consistently find that the words we speak account for a surprisingly small portion of what we actually convey to each other. The majority of what passes between people is transmitted through vocal tone, the quality, pace, rhythm, and warmth or flatness of how something is said, and through the physical behavior of the body. Posture, gesture, facial expression, the direction of gaze, the distance we keep, the tension in our jaw, the orientation of our feet. These channels of communication are older than language. They evolved over millions of years as ways of conveying status, intention, safety, and emotion before human beings had sophisticated words for any of it. The result is that the body communicates with a kind of raw directness that words often lack. A person can choose their words carefully, can rehearse what they want to say, can decide not to mention something. But the body is considerably harder to manage. It leaks. It reveals, in small involuntary ways, what's actually happening underneath the composed surface, the discomfort behind the reassurance, the uncertainty behind the confident presentation, the genuine feeling behind the socially appropriate response. Learning to read these leaks is what understanding people is really about. The foundational practice that makes everything else possible is something we might call establishing a baseline. Before you can recognize that something has shifted in a person's behavior, you need to know what their normal looks like. And this turns out to be more variable than most people assume. Crossed arms, for example, carry enormous cultural baggage as a signal of defensiveness. But for many people, crossed arms are simply a comfortable resting position, their baseline when they're completely relaxed and at ease. If you see someone sitting with crossed arms and immediately interpret it as defensiveness, you'll misread them every time. If you first observe them across a range of situations, relaxed, engaged, stressed, challenged, you build a genuine picture of their personal defaults. Then, when something changes, the change is meaningful because you have context. This is the practice: observe before you interpret. Collect data before you form conclusions. And always compare what you're seeing to what you know about this specific person in this specific context, not to a generic catalog of what gestures supposedly mean. Once you have a baseline, deviations from it become highly informative. The person who usually speaks fluidly and animatedly suddenly becomes careful and measured. Something has changed. The colleague who typically makes relaxed eye contact now glances away every time a specific topic comes up. The friend who is usually expansive in their gestures has their hands tucked away and still. You didn't invent these signals. The person is generating them. You're simply learning to notice. Now let's explore what specific channels of nonverbal communication actually reveal and how to read them. The face is the most expressive part of the human body, capable of producing thousands of distinct configurations that map to emotional states with remarkable consistency across cultures. Most of what the face does is deliberate and social: the polite smile, the attentive nod, the appropriately sympathetic expression. But the face also produces involuntary micro-expressions, brief, automatic flashes of genuine emotion that appear and disappear in a fraction of a second before the conscious social performance takes over. A flash of contempt before the agreeable response. A flicker of fear before the confident reassurance. A momentary collapse of the smile before it's replaced. These micro-expressions require training to see reliably, but even without formal training, the subconscious mind often registers them and produces the feeling that something was off, even when the conscious mind couldn't identify what it saw. Developing sensitivity to facial expression starts with removing sound from the equation. Watch conversations, interviews, interactions, without audio. When you can't hear the words, the face becomes the only available text, and you start reading it with a different quality of attention. Practice until you can identify not just the broad categories of emotion but the subtler blends, the anxiety underneath the cheerfulness, the sadness underneath the composure, the genuine surprise before it's replaced by a managed response. The eyes carry a particular weight in reading people. Human beings are intensely sensitive to gaze. We evolved in social environments where the direction and quality of another person's attention was crucial information about safety, status, and intent. Several things about eye behavior are worth tracking. The rate of blinking tends to increase with anxiety and stress. The quality of eye contact, whether it feels connected and warm or controlled and careful, carries information about emotional engagement. Where people look when they're thinking often reflects what kind of thinking they're doing: visual construction versus visual recall, emotional feeling versus logical processing. But the most important thing about eye behavior is the same as everything else: context and baseline. Some people naturally avoid eye contact because of temperament or upbringing. Others maintain it almost unnervingly as a habit. Start by knowing what's normal for the person in front of you before you try to interpret what any particular moment means. The hands are among the most expressive parts of the body and among the least consciously managed, which makes them particularly revealing. When people are genuinely relaxed and comfortable, their hands tend to be visible, open, and moving naturally in rhythm with what they're saying. When people become anxious or feel the need to conceal something, hand movement often decreases suddenly. The hands go still, retreat to pockets, clasp together, or drift to the face and neck in self-soothing gestures. That last category deserves particular attention: the self-touching gestures people produce when they're stressed, touching the neck, rubbing the face, pulling an ear, smoothing hair. These are comfort behaviors, produced automatically by the nervous system as a way of self-regulating under pressure. When someone is mid-conversation and suddenly produces a cluster of these gestures in response to a particular topic or question, you're watching the stress response in real time. Posture and the overall orientation of the body tell a story about engagement and comfort that's difficult to fake consistently over time. People generally orient their bodies, and particularly their feet, toward things and people they want to be near and away from things and people they want to escape. You can test this at any social gathering. Watch where people's feet are pointed during conversations, especially group conversations, and you'll often see clear indications of who is genuinely engaged and who is already mentally halfway out the door. Forward lean indicates interest and engagement. Backward lean typically signals evaluation, skepticism, or withdrawal, the body literally increasing distance from something it's uncertain about. The torso turning away, even slightly, often precedes emotional withdrawal from a conversation. And these postural changes typically happen before words do. The body signals the feeling before the person has consciously decided how to address it. Now let's talk about the verbal dimension, not what people say, but how they say it and what their word choices reveal. Every person has a characteristic way of representing experience through language, shaped by which sensory channels are most dominant in their mental processing. Some people think in pictures and their language reflects it. They talk about seeing the big picture, about things looking promising, about gaining clarity and perspective. Others process through sound and feel. They talk about things sounding right, about not liking the tone of a situation, about needing to hear more before deciding. Still others process through physical sensation and emotion. They talk about feeling stuck, about something sitting uneasily with them, about needing to get a better feel for things. These aren't rigid categories and most people use all of them at different times, but paying attention to someone's characteristic language patterns tells you something about how they're processing information and can guide you toward language that genuinely resonates with them. When you match someone's sensory language style, they experience a subtle sense of being understood that goes beyond the content of what you're saying. Listen also for the metaphors people use to describe their experience, because metaphors are rarely arbitrary. When someone says they're drowning in work, they're not speaking poetically, they're describing a genuine sense of overwhelm and loss of control. When someone says they're stuck, they're conveying immobility, a sense that movement isn't possible. When someone says they're under pressure, they're describing a physical experience of force being exerted on them. These are emotional maps, and if you respond to them in kind, acknowledging the feeling they encode rather than moving past them toward solutions, you create a sense of genuine understanding that's far more meaningful than agreement on content. Pay particular attention to presuppositions, the beliefs embedded invisibly in the way someone phrases things. When someone says, "Why does this always happen to me?" they're not just describing an event, they're revealing a belief about themselves and about how the world works in relation to them. When someone says, "I knew I'd mess this up," they're expressing a pattern of self-prediction. These embedded beliefs are the actual terrain of a person's inner life, and reading them accurately gives you access to what's really shaping their experience. One of the most important skills in reading people is learning to notice when what someone says and how they say it don't align. Incongruence, the mismatch between verbal content and nonverbal signals, is one of the most reliable indicators that something is being held back or managed. The person who says everything's fine in a flat voice with tight posture and absent eye contact is not communicating that everything's fine. They're communicating that something is not fine and they've decided not to share it. When you notice incongruence, the most effective response is not to call it out directly, but to create space for the fuller truth to emerge. Something gentle that acknowledges what you've noticed without forcing a confrontation. "You say things are okay, but I want to make sure, is there something you want to talk about?" This approach treats the incongruence as information to be curious about, not evidence to be deployed, and it signals that you're paying attention and that you're safe to be honest with. Now let's address something that comes with significant responsibility, the ability to detect when someone isn't being fully truthful. Deception detection is not the party trick it's sometimes presented as. There is no single sign that reliably indicates dishonesty, and the confident interpretation of any isolated signal as a lie is more likely to produce false accusations than accurate readings. What you can develop is a sensitivity to the cluster of signals that often accompany the cognitive and emotional effort of managing a deceptive communication. That effort is real and it shows. When someone is constructing a false narrative or managing information carefully, they're doing more cognitive work than they would be in straightforward conversation. This often produces a slight delay in response, a quality of careful word selection that differs from their natural speech, or reduction in spontaneous gesture and movement. The emotional energy of what they're describing may not quite match the story, the claimed feelings don't show up in the face or voice at the moment they should. But here's what matters as much as detection: understanding why. Most deception in everyday life isn't malicious. It's protective. People hide things because they're afraid of judgment, because they're not ready to face something themselves, because they're trying to manage someone else's feelings, because vulnerability feels dangerous. When you sense that you're not getting the whole truth, the most productive response is usually not confrontation but curiosity and the creation of safety. When people genuinely feel that they won't be punished for honesty, they often choose it. Let's turn to influence, the application of everything we've explored so far, and the domain where the ethical dimension becomes most important. Understanding people well gives you genuine power in conversations. You know what someone needs to hear, how they process information, what makes them feel understood, what triggers their resistance. This knowledge can be used to serve them or to exploit them, and that distinction is everything. Ethical influence is fundamentally different from manipulation in one crucial respect: it respects the other person's autonomy and works in service of outcomes that genuinely benefit them, not just outcomes that benefit you. When you use your understanding of someone to help them think through a decision more clearly, to make them feel genuinely heard, to frame an idea in a way that actually lands for them, that's influence in the service of connection and growth. When you use it to steer them towards something that serves your interests at their expense, that's manipulation, and it corrodes the trust that makes genuine connection possible. The most powerful influence tool available to anyone is genuine attentiveness. When people feel that you actually see them, not the social performance they're putting on, but the real experience underneath it, they open up. They become honest. They become willing to engage with ideas they might otherwise have defended against. This is not a technique. It's the natural result of being actually present with another person, actually curious about what they're experiencing, actually willing to adjust your understanding based on what they're revealing. Questions are among the most powerful instruments available to someone who understands people well. A well-placed question, genuinely curious, open-ended, free of judgment, can shift a conversation more profoundly than any argument or explanation. What makes you feel that way? What would need to be true for this to work for you? What's the part of this that feels most uncertain? These questions invite reflection rather than triggering defense. They treat the other person as someone worth understanding, which usually produces the most meaningful conversations. And emotional intelligence, the ability to read what someone is feeling in real time and respond to the feeling rather than just the words, may be the single highest leverage capability in any relationship context. When you sense that someone is moving toward overwhelm or withdrawal, when you notice the signs of stress accumulating before they've manifested in behavior, when you can read the temperature of a room or a conversation and adjust accordingly, you are operating at a level of interpersonal effectiveness that most people never access. The practical implications of all this are enormous. In your professional life, the ability to read people accurately translates into better communication, fewer misunderstandings, stronger relationships with colleagues and clients, more effective leadership, more successful negotiation. In your personal life, it translates into deeper intimacy, more effective support of the people you care about, fewer conflicts born of misinterpretation, and a more genuine quality of connection with virtually everyone you encounter. How do you develop these capabilities? The same way you develop any complex skill, through consistent, deliberate practice over time. Start by becoming more observant in low-stakes situations. Public spaces offer an inexhaustible supply of human behavior to study. Coffee shops, waiting rooms, parks, anywhere people are gathered and interacting. Watch without judgment. Try to read emotional states from what you observe. Try to track changes in behavior when the context shifts. Practice interpreting what you see without immediately forming definitive conclusions. Make a habit of watching filmed interactions with the sound off. When you remove the verbal content, the nonverbal communication becomes the only available signal, and your attention shifts accordingly. After doing this for a while, turn the sound back on and notice how the words relate to what the body was already saying. After conversations you find meaningful or surprising, take a few minutes to review what you observed. What physical signals did you notice? What did you sense about the person's emotional state that wasn't stated explicitly? Where did you notice incongruence, and what did you make of it? This kind of reflective practice compounds over time into genuine perceptual sharpness. And practice empathy, not as a technique but as an orientation. Before you interpret, before you react, ask yourself what this person might be experiencing. What pressures are they under? What needs are they trying to meet? What fears might be shaping how they're showing up in this conversation? This habit of genuine curiosity about other people's inner experience is the foundation everything else rests on. Here's what reading people is ultimately about: it's not about information or advantage or control. It's about connection. About the fundamental human desire to be genuinely seen and understood, and about the remarkable things that become possible in a conversation when both people feel that's actually happening. The most meaningful moments in most people's lives occur in conversations where someone finally said exactly the thing that needed to be said, or where they felt for the first time that another person truly understood what they were carrying. You can be the person who creates those moments, not through extraordinary talent or inherited sensitivity, but through the practiced, patient, compassionate attention to the people in front of you. That's the art this is really pointing toward. Not the reading of minds in some mystical sense, but the genuine seeing of people, past the social performance, past the careful words, past the managed expressions, to what's actually there. present, curious, empathetic, and paying real attention. The capacity for that kind of seeing is available to you right now, in the next conversation you have. Start there. Notice more. Interpret less. Listen longer. And watch what opens up.